A single dad veteran saved a man's life at a fancy steakhouse with 2 simple words, unaware he had just rescued the city's powerful police chief. "You're not welcome here." The rain hammered down on the glass roof of the bus stop like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild. Each drop a cold punctuation mark on Elias Vance's already shattered spirit. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the worn, threadbare fabric of his old army jacket for a split second before darkness swallowed it whole, mirroring the fleeting glimpses of hope that were so quickly extinguished in his life. He was weary. Elias pulled the collar of the jacket tighter around his neck, the biting cold seeping into his bones, a familiar ache that had become a constant companion since Sarah had been taken from them. He glanced down at the small hand tucked so trustingly into his, at the top of a little blonde head that barely reached his waist. Lily, his daughter, his entire world, looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, her breath fogging in the frigid air. A quiet sob caught in his throat, a raw, unspoken grief for the life he couldn't give her, for the mother she would never truly remember. He saw Sarah in Lily's unwavering gaze, in the gentle curve of her smile, a sacred legacy he was failing to protect from the harsh realities of their world. He clenched his jaw, the muscle twitching with a desperate resolve. He would not fail her. Not tonight. Tonight was her 6th birthday, a milestone that felt both monumental and unbearable. He had promised her a special dinner, a promise made in a moment of reckless love, whispered in the dark of their tiny, cold apartment as she shivered under a thin blanket. He had saved for months, collecting loose change, working extra hours washing dishes in a greasy diner kitchen until his hands were raw and his back screamed in protest. He had just enough, he'd calculated, for one child's plate at the Gilded Steer, the fanciest steakhouse in the city, a place of gleaming windows and golden light that Lily stared at with longing every time their bus passed by. He would drink water. He would eat the leftover crusts of her bread. But she, for one night, would feel like a princess. It was a foolish, desperate gamble, a single flickering candle against a hurricane, but it was all he had to offer. The bus finally arrived with a hydraulic hiss, its lights cutting through the heavy fog. They climbed aboard, the warmth inside a shocking, welcome embrace. Lily pressed her face against the cold glass, her eyes wide with excitement as the city lights blurred into streaks of color. Elias watched her, his heart a tight, painful knot in his chest. This small, selfless act of love for his daughter was the only thing holding the pieces of his shattered life together. He didn't know it yet, but this simple, profound need to give his daughter a moment of joy would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Their lives were about to collide with a force of loneliness and power they could never have imagined. The world was about to pivot on the axis of a single, selfless act. The interior of the Gilded Steer was even more overwhelming than Elias had imagined. A cavernous space of polished marble floors, ornate chandeliers that dripped crystal light, and the soft hush of wealth. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and expensive perfume, a world away from the damp chill of their apartment. A stern-looking woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a crisp, black dress approached them, her eyes sweeping over Elias's worn jacket and faded jeans with thinly veiled disdain. This was Mrs. Delacroix, the owner, a woman whose heart was as cold and polished as the floors she commanded. "A table for 2, Elias said, his voice steady despite the frantic thudding of his heart. Lily hid behind his leg, peeking out at the golden glow of the room. Mrs. Delacroix's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "We have a dress code," she stated, her tone dripping with ice. Elias's face flushed with a hot, familiar shame. He had known this might happen. He had spent an hour trying to press his one good shirt with a hot pan over the stove, but there was no hiding the frayed collar, no disguising the simple fact that they did not belong. "It's my daughter's birthday," he said, his voice quiet but firm. We won't be any trouble for a moment." He thought she would turn them away, the humiliation a physical blow. But then her eyes fell on Lily, who was now staring at a towering chocolate cake on a dessert cart, her little face a perfect portrait of awe. A flicker of something unreadable crossed the woman's face. Perhaps a shard of a long-forgotten memory, or perhaps just the cold calculation of a business owner who didn't want a scene. With a theatrical sigh, she snapped her fingers at a young waiter. Put them in the corner. By the kitchens, the corner was small and drafty, but Lily didn't notice. She was mesmerized, her eyes tracing the patterns on the starched white tablecloth, her feet swinging back and forth, too short to reach the floor. Elias's own anxiety began to recede as he watched the pure, innocent joy on her face. This was worth it. It was worth the humiliation, the gnawing hunger in his own stomach, the last few crumpled dollars in his pocket. He ordered Lily the smallest steak on the menu and a glass of milk, and for himself a glass of water with lemon. From his vantage point, he could see most of the dining room. It was filled with couples laughing, men in impeccable suits closing deals, families celebrating without a care in the world. And then he saw him, a man sitting alone at a small table, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit but with a profound, almost haunted loneliness in his eyes. He stared into his glass of amber liquid as if it held the answers to the universe. There was a commanding stillness about him, an aura of power that seemed at odds with his visible sorrow. This was Chief Marcus Thorne, a man who commanded a force of thousands, but who sat alone, drowning in the sterile silence of his own grief. He hadn't smiled, not truly, in the 5 years since he'd buried his son, a promising young officer cut down in the line of duty. His world had become a landscape of duty, order, and unspoken pain. He was here tonight because the anniversary of his son's death was a wound that refused to scar over, and the crushing emptiness of his stately home was unbearable. He didn't notice the veteran and his small daughter in the corner. He was lost in a fog of memory, the taste of the expensive steak turning to ash in his mouth. Lily's food arrived, a sizzling platter that made her gasp with delight. Elias carefully cut the meat into small pieces for her, his movements gentle and practiced. He watched her take the first bite, her eyes closing in bliss. A real, genuine smile finally touched his lips, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was in that exact moment of pure, selfless paternal love that the world shifted. Marcus Thorne, raising a piece of steak to his lips, distracted by a sudden, sharp memory of his own son's laughter, swallowed wrong. The piece of meat lodged deep in his throat. His eyes widened in shock, then panic. He couldn't breathe. He dropped his fork with a clatter, his hands flying to his throat, a desperate, silent plea. A few nearby diners looked over, confused, before turning back to their conversations. No one understood. No one saw the terror in his eyes. But Elias saw. He was a veteran, a former combat medic. He knew the signs instantly, the panicked expression, the inability to speak or cough, the slight bluish tint already appearing on the man's lips. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He acted. He shot up from his chair, his own hunger and humiliation vanishing in a surge of pure, focused adrenaline. "Lily, stay right there," he commanded, his voice calm and authoritative. He crossed the space between their tables in 3 long strides. Marcus was starting to slump in his chair, his face a mask of primal fear. The room was finally starting to notice, a ripple of alarm spreading outward. Elias got behind him, wrapping his arms around the man's torso. He made a fist with one hand, placing the thumb side against the man's abdomen, just above the navel. He gripped his fist with his other hand. "Don't talk," Elias said, his voice low and steady in Marcus's ear, a command meant to prevent further panic. He then delivered a series of sharp, upward thrusts. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. The man's body was heavy, starting to go limp. Elias adjusted his grip, putting all of his strength, all of his training, all of his desperate focus into the next move. For, on the 5th powerful thrust, the piece of meat dislodged, flying out of the man's mouth and landing on the pristine white tablecloth. Marcus collapsed forward, gasping, taking in a huge, shuddering, life-giving breath of air. The sound echoed in the now silent restaurant. His heart thudded against his ribs like a trapped bird. Elias held him steady for a moment, his hand on the man's shoulder, ensuring he was stable. He saw the color returning to his face, the raw terror in his eyes slowly being replaced by dazed relief. The entire restaurant was staring, a sea of shocked faces. Waiters were rushing over, Mrs. Delacroix's sharp voice cutting through the hush. Elias ignored them all. His job was done. Without a word, without waiting for thanks, he released the man, turned on his heel, and walked back to his corner table, his expression unreadable. He sat down opposite his daughter, who was looking at him with wide, curious eyes. "Is that man okay, Daddy?" she asked in a small voice. Elias picked up his glass of water, his hand trembling slightly from the adrenaline. "He's okay now, sweetie," he said, his voice a soft murmur. He took a sip of water. He was just a father having dinner with his daughter. He had done what anyone should have done. He didn't know that the man whose life he had just saved was the most powerful law enforcement officer in the city. He didn't know that this quiet, selfless act of heroism had just cracked open a heart that had been sealed shut by grief for 5 long years. Marcus Thorne watched him go, the image of the veteran's calm, unwavering eyes burned into his memory. A profound, seismic shift was happening inside him. He had been saved. The commotion in the restaurant slowly subsided, the low hum of conversation returning, though now it was peppered with whispers and furtive glances toward both Elias's and Marcus's tables. A manager rushed to Marcus's side, offering water, asking if he needed a doctor, his words a frantic tumble of professional concern. Marcus waved him away, his gaze still fixed on the man in the corner. He watched as the veteran patiently wiped a smudge of chocolate from his daughter's cheek with a napkin, his movements filled with a tender, sacred care. It was the simple, profound intimacy of the gesture that struck Marcus more than the heroic act that had preceded it. He saw a man with nothing, who possessed everything that mattered. He saw a father's love, pure and unconditional, the very thing he had lost and mourned for half a decade. A raw, unfamiliar emotion welled up in his chest, something akin to awe. He felt an undeniable urge to go over there, to thank the man properly, to learn his name. But he was still shaken, his throat raw, and the weight of his own public position made him hesitate. He was not used to being vulnerable. He was used to being in command. As he sat there, collecting himself, he watched as Elias signaled for the check. The young waiter brought it over on a small, polished tray. Elias opened the leather-bound folder, his face calm, but Marcus, a man trained to read people, saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the subtle flicker of anxiety in his eyes. Elias pulled the few crumpled bills from his pocket, his entire net worth, and laid them carefully on the tray. He counted them once, then twice. His shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. He was short. It wasn't by much, just a few dollars, the result of a miscalculation of the city's steep sales tax. But it might as well have been $1 million. It was a gap he could not bridge. He sat there for a long moment, the silence at his table stretching thin. He had 2 choices: cause a scene by admitting he couldn't pay the full amount, or slip away, an act of theft that went against every principle he held. His military service had been built on a foundation of honor, a code he still lived by even in his civilian desperation. He chose the former. He quietly tried to get the waiter's attention, his face pale with shame. But before the waiter could notice, Mrs. Delacroix descended upon their table like a hawk. She had been watching, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had seen the worn jacket, the cheap shoes, and the meager pile of cash. She had been waiting for this. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice carrying across the nearby tables, loud enough to be a declaration. Elias flinched. "No, ma'am. I was just—" "You're short, aren't you?" she cut in, snatching the receipt from the tray. She glanced at the total, then at the cash. $5.32 short. You come into my establishment, dressed like a vagrant, and you can't even pay for your child's meal. The public humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on Elias, stealing the air from his lungs. Lily's lower lip began to tremble, her birthday dinner dissolving into a nightmare. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. the cold cruelty in the woman's eyes. "I'm sorry," Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. "It was a mistake. I can wash dishes to cover it. I'm a hard worker." Mrs. Delacroix let out a short, derisive laugh. "We don't employ your kind. People like you think you can just walk in and take advantage. You're a thief." From his table, Marcus Thorne watched the scene unfold, a cold fury building in his chest. This was the man who had saved his life, a hero, being publicly shredded over the price of a child's steak. He started to rise, but something made him pause. The veteran wasn't fighting back. He wasn't yelling or making excuses. He simply stood up, his back ramrod straight, a wall of quiet, dignified resolve. He gently took Lily's hand. "We're leaving," he said, his voice low but unwavering, directed at his daughter, not the woman insulting him. He met Mrs. Delacroix's gaze. "You can call the police if you feel you must. I will not run." The sheer, unflinching honor of the man was breathtaking. He was willing to be arrested, to face that shame, rather than compromise his dignity. Mrs. Delacroix was momentarily taken aback, her script of outrage disrupted. "Get out!" she finally hissed, her face contorted with rage. "And don't you ever show your face in here again." Elias nodded once, a sharp military gesture of acknowledgement. He led a now sobbing Lily out of the restaurant, past the staring eyes of the other diners, and back into the cold, pounding rain. They vanished into the night. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving a sterile silence in its wake. Marcus Thorne felt as if he had been punched in the gut. He had sat by and watched it happen. He had let that man, his savior, walk out into the storm under a cloud of false accusation. A profound sense of shame washed over him. He stood up, his presence suddenly commanding, silencing the remaining whispers. He walked over to Mrs. Delacroix, his face a mask of cold fury. He pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet and threw it on the counter. "This covers his bill," he said, his voice like ice. "And I can assure you, I will be the one speaking with the police." He turned and walked out of the restaurant without another word, leaving the owner pale and trembling. He stood on the sidewalk, the rain soaking his expensive suit, but he didn't feel it. He stared into the darkness where the man and his daughter had disappeared. He didn't have a name. He didn't have any information. But he had a purpose. A new, undeniable purpose had just ignited in the hollow chambers of his heart. He would find this man. He would find him and repay a debt that had become more than just a matter of life and death. It had become a matter of honor. He had to restore the balance. He had to find his hidden savior. The next morning, Chief Marcus Thorne sat in his cavernous, polished office. The city skyline spread out before him like a kingdom he was supposed to protect. But his mind wasn't on the crime statistics or the budget reports stacked neatly on his desk. It was consumed by the image of a weary veteran and his small, innocent daughter. The feeling of helplessness he'd experienced while choking had been terrifying, but the feeling of shame he'd felt watching that man be humiliated was somehow worse. It was a stain on his soul. He had access to the most sophisticated surveillance systems and databases in the city, tools he used daily to hunt criminals. Now he would use them to find a hero. It felt like a misuse of power, a line he was hesitant to cross, but the gnawing need to right the previous night's wrong was too strong to ignore. He started with the restaurant's reservation system and security footage. The man hadn't made a reservation, and he'd paid, or attempted to pay, with cash. A ghost. But Marcus was relentless. He had his most trusted analyst, a tech wizard named Peterson, discreetly pull the exterior street camera footage from the time the man and his daughter left the Gilded Steer. "I'm looking for a man and a little girl, Chief," Peterson had asked, confused by the unusual request. "Personal matter," Marcus had replied, his tone leaving no room for questions. Took hours. They tracked the pair through the rain-slicked streets, following them from one camera's view to the next, a painstaking process of digital breadcrumbs. They followed them to a bus stop, tracked the bus route, and finally watched them get off in a rundown, forgotten neighborhood on the industrial side of town. The trail went cold as they disappeared into a dilapidated apartment building, a place the city maps seemed to ignore. But it was enough. Marcus now knew the building. He dispatched a plainclothes officer he trusted implicitly, a man named Henderson, with a carefully constructed cover story. "Just observe," Marcus instructed. "I need a name. I need to know his situation. Be discreet. This man is not a suspect. He's a person of interest to me personally. He is to be treated with absolute respect within 24 hours. He had a full report on his desk. The name? Elias Vance, a decorated veteran, honorably discharged after 2 tours. His wife, Sarah, had died from a sudden illness a year ago, leaving him with a mountain of medical debt. He was a single father to 6-year-old Lily Vance. He worked off the books as a dishwasher at a small 24-hour diner, the kind of grueling, underpaid work that barely kept them afloat. The report detailed their poverty in stark, bureaucratic terms. Overdue rent notices, a nearly bare pantry, a single space heater fighting a losing battle against the winter cold. Each sentence was a hammer blow to Marcus's conscience. This man, who had nothing, had acted with more honor and courage than anyone Marcus had met in years. He saw in Elias's file the echo of his own son, a man committed to service, a man of quiet strength. But where his son had been lost to violence, Elias was being slowly crushed by circumstance. Marcus knew he couldn't just write a check. That would feel like a transaction, a cheapening of the profound debt he owed. It would also wound the pride of a man like Elias Vance. No, this had to be different. It had to be a quiet, steady current of support, an unseen hand lifting them from the depths. His secret intervention began that night. Henderson, under Marcus's direction, arranged for 3 large boxes of groceries, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, milk, and a large, ridiculously extravagant chocolate cake, to be left silently on the doorstep of Elias's apartment. A simple and signed note was attached, written in plain, block letters on a cheap piece of paper. A gift from someone you helped. The next morning, Elias opened his door to find the bounty. He froze, his mind reeling with confusion and suspicion. He looked up and down the hallway, but it was empty. He cautiously brought the boxes inside. When Lily saw the cake, her gasp of pure joy echoed in the small room. For Elias, the feeling was more complicated. It was a mix of profound relief and a deep, unsettling mystery. Who could have done this? His mind immediately went to the man at the restaurant, the only stranger he had helped recently. Could it be him? The thought was both comforting and disquieting. A few days later, a crisp white envelope appeared under their door. Inside was a money order for the exact amount of their overdue rent and utilities, with a few $100s to spare. The memo line was blank. There was no note this time, just the silent, miraculous lifting of a crushing weight. Elias stared at the piece of paper, his hands trembling. This wasn't just a kind gesture. This was a lifeline. It was safety. It was warmth. It was the ability to buy Lily a proper winter coat, one without holes in the elbows. He felt a sob of gratitude catch in his throat, a release of pressure that had been building for months. He didn't understand it, but for the first time since Sarah's death, a fragile tendril of hope began to unfurl in his chest. Marcus watched all of this from a distance, receiving Henderson's quiet updates. He learned that Elias had immediately paid the rent, then taken Lily to a department store and bought her the warmest, brightest pink coat she could find. The report included a blurry photo of Lily twirling on the sidewalk in her new coat, a beacon of light against the city's gray backdrop. Seeing it, Marcus felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he had thought long dead. It was the feeling of making a difference, not with the brute force of the law, but with quiet compassion. He was healing them, but he was also, piece by piece, healing himself. He was reawakening a part of his soul that had been dormant, frozen by grief. This anonymous charity wasn't enough, though. He knew he needed to see the man again, to talk to him, to forge a real connection. He needed to look into those unwavering eyes and understand the source of their strength. He just had to find the right way to do it. Marcus knew that approaching Elias directly, revealing his identity as the police chief, would create an immediate power imbalance, a wall of formality that would prevent any genuine connection. He needed to meet him on neutral ground as equals. He learned from Henderson's reports that Elias's shift at the Starlight Diner ended at 2 a.m., a soul-crushing hour that left him exhausted. The diner itself was a relic of a bygone era, a place of cracked vinyl booths, flickering fluorescent lights, and the lingering smell of stale coffee and grease. It was the perfect place to be anonymous. So, one cold Tuesday night, just before 2 a.m., Marcus Thorne, dressed not in a crisp suit but in a simple dark sweater and slacks, slipped into a booth at the back of the Starlight Diner. He looked like just another weary traveler, another lonely soul seeking refuge in the diner's amber hue. He ordered a black coffee he didn't want and waited. The minutes ticked by. Through the swinging doors to the kitchen, he could hear the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the industrial sprayer. At precisely 2:05 a.m., the swinging doors opened and Elias Vance emerged, wiping his raw, chapped hands on a dirty apron. He looked even more gaunt and weary under the harsh diner lights than he had at the steakhouse. His shoulders were slumped with exhaustion, the lines around his hollow eyes etched deeper. He didn't even notice Marcus as he shuffled toward the front door, pulling on his thin army jacket. "Elias," Marcus said, his voice quiet but clear in the near-empty diner. Elias froze, his hand on the door. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he tried to place the face. He recognized him instantly, the man from the restaurant, the man whose life he had saved. A flicker of apprehension crossed his face. "I'm not looking for any trouble," Elias said, his voice flat, defensive. "I know," Marcus said gently, gesturing to the seat opposite him. "Please, let me buy you a cup of coffee. I never got the chance to thank you properly." Elias hesitated, his instinct for self-preservation warring with a reluctant curiosity. He was exhausted and just wanted to go home to his daughter, but there was something in the man's eyes, a sincerity, a shared weariness, that made him relent. He slid into the booth, his body language still tense and guarded. A waitress refilled Marcus's cup and poured one for Elias. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of a passing truck. It was a fragile, unspoken truce. "What you did at the restaurant," Marcus began, his voice raspy with an emotion he rarely showed. "You saved my life. I was careless." "You were not," Elias just shrugged, staring into his coffee cup. "I was a medic in the army. It's just training. Instinct." "No, it was more than that," Marcus insisted. "You were calm. You were in control. And then you just walked away. You didn't ask for anything." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And the groceries? The rent money? Was that you?" Elias finally looked up, his eyes meeting Marcus's. He saw the truth there before the man even spoke. "I owed you a debt," Marcus said simply. "More than a debt. You have a daughter. A man with your character shouldn't have to struggle like that." A surge of fierce pride flared in Elias's chest. "I don't want your charity. We get by." "It isn't charity," Marcus said, his voice firm but gentle. "It's gratitude. There's a difference." He saw the wall of pride in Elias and knew he had to find a crack, a way to connect on a deeper level. He decided to offer a piece of himself, a shard of his own shattered past. "I had a son," Marcus said, the words feeling heavy and strange on his tongue. He hadn't spoken them to a stranger in years. His name was David. He was a police officer, eager, full of life. He was killed in the line of duty 5 years ago. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and profound. The sterile silence of the diner suddenly felt sacred. Elias's defensive posture softened. The guarded look in his eyes was replaced by a deep, knowing empathy. He had his own ghost, his own sacred grief. "My wife," Elias said, his voice cracking slightly. "Sarah. It was an aneurysm. One minute she was laughing, making Lily a sandwich. The next, she was gone. That was a year ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime." Now it was Marcus's turn to listen, to see the unbearable pain behind the man's quiet dignity. He didn't offer empty platitudes or clumsy reassurances. Instead, he simply nodded, a gesture of shared understanding that was more powerful than any words. He felt a bond forming between them, forged not in heroism or gratitude, but in the crucible of shared loss. They were two sides of the same coin. Two fathers, two men hollowed out by grief, trying to navigate a world that had lost its color. "What you have with your daughter," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "The way you care for her. It's a precious thing. Don't ever let the world take that from you." He saw the flicker of Sarah's memory in Elias's glistening eyes and the ghost of his own son in the empty space beside him. They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing easily now. Two lonely men finding a rare moment of connection in the dead of night. They talked about the army, about the challenges of fatherhood, about the quiet moments that get you through the day. Elias found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone since Sarah died. He felt seen. He felt understood. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Marcus knew it was time to go. He left a $20 bill on the table, more than enough to cover the coffee. "Thank you, Elias," he said, standing up. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he placed a hand gently on Elias's shoulder, a simple, non-romantic gesture of solidarity and respect. For everything Elias watched him leave, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. He still didn't know the man's name or what he did for a living. He only knew that for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel completely alone. He had a feeling, a deep, certain premonition, that their paths would cross again. He just had no idea how dramatically. Weeks turned into a month, and a fragile sense of stability began to settle over Elias and Lily's small world. The anonymous gifts had stopped after his meeting with the man from the diner, whose name he still didn't know, but the breathing room the money had provided was enough. Elias had been able to catch up on bills, to fill their pantry, to fix the rattling heater in the wall. The constant, grinding pressure of desperation had eased, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. He even managed to find a slightly better job, working as a daytime prep cook at a family-run Italian place, which meant he could be home to tuck Lily into bed at night. It was a small change, but it felt monumental. The memory of the humiliation at the Gilded Steer had begun to fade, smoothed over by the more recent memory of the quiet camaraderie he'd shared with the mysterious stranger. One bright, cold Saturday afternoon, Elias decided to take Lily to the Grand City Park downtown. It was adjacent to the opulent district where the Gilded Steer was located, a place they had avoided since that awful night. But the park had a carousel, and Lily had been talking about it for weeks. He felt a new, tentative confidence. They were not destitute anymore. They were surviving. He could afford the $2 for a carousel ticket. He could afford a hot pretzel from a street vendor. They belonged in the sunshine just as much as anyone else. Lily's laughter echoed through the crisp air as she spun around on a brightly painted horse, her new pink coat a blur of color. Elias watched her, a genuine, unburdened smile on his face. For this one perfect afternoon, everything was right in the world. As they were leaving the park, hand in hand, Lily's face sticky with sugar from a shared cotton candy, their path intersected with fate. A sleek, black town car pulled up to the curb, and from it emerged Mrs. Delacroix, the owner of the Gilded Steer, looking as severe and impeccable as she had that night. She was heading into a neighboring art gallery. Her eyes, sharp and cold, swept the street and landed on Elias and Lily. A flicker of recognition turned into a sneer of pure contempt. She stopped directly in their path, blocking the sidewalk. Well, she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Look what the wind blew in. I thought I told you to never show your face in this part of town again." Elias froze, his brief moment of happiness shattering like glass. He instinctively pulled Lily behind him, shielding her from the woman's poisonous glare. "We're just leaving," he said, his voice tight and controlled. He tried to steer Lily around her, but Mrs. Delacroix stepped sideways, blocking them again. "Oh, I'm sure you are," she spat, her voice rising, attracting the attention of passers-by, probably casing the place. Looking for your next handout. Or maybe you're planning to dine and dash somewhere else tonight. Is that your business model? Using your pathetic-looking child to garner sympathy so you can steal a meal. The public accusation was brutal, the words landing like physical blows. People were stopping to stare, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Elias's face burned with a shame so intense it was dizzying. He could feel Lily trembling behind him. "Please," he said, his voice a low plea. "Stop. You're scaring my daughter." "I'm scaring her." Mrs. Delacroix laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You should be scared. People like you are a plague on this city. You're leeches preying on the hard work of decent people. Someone should do the city a favor and sweep you away with the rest of the trash." She pointed a long, manicured finger at his chest. "You are a thief and a disgrace." Elias stood there, trapped, enduring the hailstorm of insults. He remained dignified, his back straight, his eyes fixed on a point over her shoulder, but inside he was splintering. He could handle his own humiliation, but seeing the terror and confusion in Lily's eyes was unbearable. The world had narrowed to this one horrific, inescapable moment. He was overwhelmed. And then, a calm, commanding voice cut through the air, sharp and clear as a blade. "That's enough, Mrs. Delacroix." The crowd parted. Standing there on the edge of the sidewalk was Marcus Thorne. But he was not the quietly grieving man from the diner. He was in his full dress uniform. A crisp, dark blue, impeccably tailored suit, adorned with gleaming medals, polished brass buttons, and the unmistakable, authoritative insignia of the chief of police. He was flanked by two uniformed officers who had emerged silently from a nearby patrol car. His presence was seismic, shifting the entire power dynamic of the street in an instant. Mrs. Delacroix's jaw dropped. Her face went pale, the color draining away to a pasty white. She stammered, "Sage Chief Thorne, I heard what you were just doing," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low as he strode forward, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. He stopped beside Elias, placing a firm, protective hand on his shoulder. He didn't even look at Mrs. Delacroix. His focus was entirely on Elias, his eyes conveying a message of unwavering support. Then, he turned his gaze upon the woman, and the full weight of his authority descended upon her. "This man," Marcus announced, his voice ringing with power, projecting to the entire assembled crowd, "is Elias Vance. He is a decorated combat veteran who served this country with honor. And 2 months ago, in your restaurant, he saved my life." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Mrs. Delacroix looked as if she might faint. "While you were preparing to humiliate him over a $5 miscalculation," Marcus continued, his voice like steel, "this man, without hesitation, performed a medical procedure that kept me from choking to death on the overpriced steak you serve. He asked for nothing. He expected nothing. He acted with a quiet heroism that you, in your pettiness and cruelty, could never comprehend." He took a step closer to her, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "You call him a thief. You call him a disgrace. I call him a hero. The only disgrace I see on this street today, madam, is you." He let the words hang in the stunned silence. He then turned back to Elias, his expression softening completely. He knelt down so he was at eye level with a terrified Lily. "It's okay, little one," he said, his voice gentle. "No one is going to hurt you or your daddy. I promise." He then stood and faced Elias, the man who had become his unlikely friend. "Elias," he said, his voice full of a profound respect, "I believe I have a job opening in our community outreach division. It's for a liaison to the city's veterans. It requires a man of honor, integrity, and quiet strength. Pays well. And it's yours if you want it." The world stopped spinning. Elias stared at him, at the uniform, at the incredible, impossible offer hanging in the air. Disbelief warred with a dawning, brilliant hope. He couldn't speak. He could only nod, a single, jerky motion. Marcus smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Good," he said. He then turned his attention one last time to the speechless, trembling Mrs. Delacroix. As for you, he said, his voice dropping back to ice, I'll be having a conversation with the city licensing board about your establishment. Harassment is not good for business. He then guided Elias and Lily away from the scene, leaving Mrs. Delacroix to be swallowed by the silent, judging stares of the crowd she had so desperately tried to impress. The public salvation was complete. The walk away from the scene was a blur for Elias. The sharp sounds of the city seemed muffled, distant, as if he were moving through a dream. Marcus led them to a quiet bench in a small, secluded plaza, away from any lingering stares. Lily, sensing the danger had passed, finally released her death grip on Elias's leg and climbed onto the bench, her small face still streaked with tears. Marcus sat on the other side of her, creating a protective space around the small family. The two uniformed officers stood at a respectful distance, a silent, imposing guard. For a long time, no one spoke. Elias was trying to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. The quiet, lonely man from the diner was the chief of police. The man whose life he had saved held the fate of the city in his hands. The sheer, overwhelming improbability of it all was too much to grasp. "You're the chief," Elias finally managed to say, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Marcus offered a small, weary smile. "I am. I apologize for not telling you sooner. I wanted to thank you as a man, not as a title. I wanted to know the person who saved me, not just be a beneficiary of your sense of duty." Elias looked at his own worn hands, then at the powerful, confident man beside him. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Marcus replied, his voice gentle. "I meant what I said about the job, Elias. It's a real position. We need someone like you. Someone who understands service, who understands struggle. Someone people will trust. You'd be an asset to the department and to the city." The offer was a lifeboat in the storm-tossed sea of his life. A good job, a steady paycheck, purpose. It was everything he had been praying for, a salvation so complete it felt unreal. "Why?" Elias asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Why are you doing all of this for me?" Marcus's gaze softened, and he looked out at the city skyline, a deep sadness and a newfound peace mingling in his eyes. "When my son, David, died, a part of me died with him. I kept going through the motions, doing my job, but my heart, it was frozen. I saw the world in black and white, a place of rules and consequences, of crime and punishment. There was no room for grace." He turned back to Elias, his expression raw with honesty. "That night at the restaurant, when I was choking, I felt a terror I hadn't felt since the day I got the call about David. And then you were there. You acted. And after, when I saw you with your daughter, when I saw you face down that woman with such dignity, you reminded me of what's important. You reminded me of the good in people. You, Elias, and your love for your daughter. You brought color back into my world. You reawakened a part of me I thought was gone forever. So, you see, this isn't me saving you. In a way, we're saving each other." A single tear traced a path down Elias's weary cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or shame, but of profound, cathartic release. He finally understood. This wasn't charity. It was a connection, a bond forged in the most unlikely of circumstances, a shared redemption. "The job," Elias said, his voice steady now, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "I accept." A broad, warm smile spread across Marcus's face. He reached across Lily, who was now quietly watching them with wide, curious eyes, and clasped Elias's forearm. It was a gesture of immense respect, of a promise made and a future secured. Over the next few weeks, Marcus was true to his every word. He fast-tracked Elias's hiring, personally overseeing the process. Elias Vance, the former dishwasher, was now a community liaison officer, with a desk, a phone, and the respect of his colleagues. The salary was more than he had ever dreamed of, enough to not just survive, but to thrive. But Marcus's help didn't stop there. He knew that their tiny, dilapidated apartment was no place to build a new life. Using his own personal funds, he secured a down payment on a small, charming house in a quiet, safe neighborhood with good schools. It had a little backyard with a swing set and a room for Lily painted a bright, sunny yellow. When Marcus took Elias and Lily to see it for the first time, presenting them with the key, Elias was speechless. He walked through the warm, sunlit rooms, touching the walls as if to confirm they were real. He saw Lily run into the backyard, her laughter filling the air as she discovered the swing set. He broke down. He stood in the middle of the living room and wept, the culmination of a year of grief, desperation, and fear finally washing away, replaced by an overwhelming wave of hope and security. Marcus stood by quietly, giving him the space for his emotional release. He understood that these were not just walls and a roof. This was a sanctuary. This was a future. The resolution was not just financial. It was familial. Marcus, a man adrift in his large empty house, found himself spending more and more time at their cozy new home. He would come for dinner, helping Lily with her homework, listening to Elias talk about his day. He taught Lily how to properly salute, and she taught him how to have a proper tea party with her stuffed animals. He was no longer just the police chief or a grateful stranger. He had become family. He was the grandfather Lily had never known, the father figure and mentor Elias so desperately needed. The hollow spaces in their lives, carved out by loss, were slowly being filled by the warmth of their new, unlikely, chosen family. They had found their happily ever after, not in a romantic union, but in the profound, healing power of friendship and unwavering support. 1 year later, the golden glow of late afternoon sun streamed through the large kitchen window, illuminating the dancing dust motes and casting a warm, amber hue over the scene within. The house was filled with the delicious aroma of a roasting chicken and the sweet scent of a baking birthday cake. Laughter, real and unrestrained, echoed off the cheerful yellow walls. Lily, now a confident 7-year-old, stood on a stool, carefully placing 7 candles on the chocolate cake she had helped decorate. Her hair, a shade brighter than the year before, was tied back in a messy ponytail, and a smudge of frosting adorned her nose. She looked healthy, happy, and utterly secure. Elias stood beside her, his arm resting gently on her back. The weary, haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a calm, steady light. He was wearing a soft, comfortable sweater, a world away from the threadbare army jacket that had once been his armor against the world. He had filled out, the gauntness in his cheeks replaced by the healthy look of a man who was no longer starving his body or his soul. He looked over at the man sitting at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper with a pair of glasses perched on his nose. Marcus Thorne looked completely at ease, a domesticity about him that belied his powerful position in the city. He had taken to spending most of his weekends here, the sterile silence of his own stately mansion no match for the vibrant, loving chaos of this home. He looked up from his paper and smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Is that cake ready yet, birthday girl?" An old man could waste away waiting for a slice. Lily giggled. "Almost, Grandpa Marcus," she chirped, the name rolling off her tongue with natural affection. The title had started as a joke and had simply stuck, cementing his place in their family. Elias watched them, his heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. He thought back to that night 1 year ago, to the cold rain and the hollow feeling of desperation. Felt like another lifetime, a story about someone else. The contrast was so stark, so absolute, it was breathtaking. His job at the police department was more fulfilling than he could have imagined. He was good at it. His quiet demeanor and his own experiences with hardship made him uniquely suited to connect with veterans who had fallen through the cracks. He was making a real difference, helping men and women just like him find their footing again. He was no longer a victim of circumstance. He was an agent of change. He had found his purpose again, a mission that went beyond just surviving. Later that evening, after the cake was eaten and the presents were opened, a new bicycle from Elias, a complete set of art supplies from Marcus. Elias tucked a sleepy Lily into her bed. He read her a story, his voice a low, soothing murmur in the soft light of her bedside lamp. "Daddy?" she said, her eyes half closed. "Yeah, sweetie?" "This was the best birthday ever," she whispered, and then she was asleep. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her peaceful, sleeping form, the sacred weight of his love for her a comforting presence. He went back downstairs to find Marcus sitting on the back porch, looking up at the stars. Elias grabbed 2 bottles of beer from the fridge and joined him, sinking into the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the gentle chirping of crickets. "Thank you, Marcus," Elias said quietly, breaking the silence. "For all of this. For everything." Marcus took a slow sip of his beer. "I should be thanking you, Elias. You gave me my life back." In more ways than 1 inch, he gestured around at the cozy backyard, at the warm lights of the house. "You gave me a reason to come home." Elias nodded, understanding completely. They were a family, forged in a moment of crisis and bonded by shared grief and mutual respect. They had found their way out of the darkness, together. The past year had been a testament to the idea that a single act of selfless kindness could ripple outward, creating waves of change that could heal even the most shattered of lives. Their future stretched before them, bright and full of promise. A quiet, dignified life built on a foundation of honor, love, and a second chance they had given to each other. This story serves as a powerful testament to the unseen threads that connect us all. It reminds us that an act of kindness, no matter how small or unsolicited, can be the catalyst for miraculous change, a single candle that can illuminate the darkest of paths. Elias, in his quiet desperation, sought only to give his daughter a moment of joy, but in doing so, he saved a life and, in turn, saved his own. Marcus, trapped in a prison of grief and power, was reawakened by the purity of a selfless act, reminding him that true strength lies not in command, but in compassion. Their journey from shared tragedy to a chosen family illustrates a profound truth. Sometimes, the people who need saving the most are the ones who have the power to save others. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the goodness of people, we hope you'll carry its message with you. In a world that can often feel cold and transactional, remember the power you hold to be a force for warmth and grace. A simple gesture, a helping hand, a moment of dignity offered to a stranger. These are the things that have the power to mend a broken world, one connection at a time. We believe that stories like this are more than just entertainment. They are nourishment for the soul. For more inspiring and soul-stirring stories that celebrate the enduring power of love, kindness, and human connection, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to continue bringing these heartwarming narratives to light. We'll see you in the next one.